In the final days of 2023, as the cool December air began to creep through the bayous and rural estates of St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, the atmosphere should have been bustling with preparations for a festive Mardi Gras season. Instead, a grim fog of fear and uncertainty had settled over the local people, especially within the community of gig economy delivery drivers. The story began on the afternoon of November 12th, when Sarah Sullivan, the wife of a 32-year-old driver named Leo Sullivan, rushed into the St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office to report her husband's sudden disappearance. With a face streaked with tears, Sarah explained that Leo had left home early that morning, as usual. He was a model husband and father. He did not drink, did not gamble, and had no debts or conflicts. The last time she had spoken to him was around 2 p.m. He said he was dropping off an order in a rural area and would be home soon. But she waited until late evening, and he never returned. His phone rang, but no one answered. Then, it was turned off, and all contact was lost. Upon receiving the report, the sheriff's office conducted initial verification steps. However, finding a missing adult in a vast area like St. Bernard Parish was incredibly difficult. Task forces checked motels and hospitals and questioned Leo's friends and colleagues, but to no avail. Leo Sullivan's case was filed as a missing person, and the hope of finding him dwindled with each passing day. The tragedy seemed like an isolated incident, but it repeated itself with terrifying similarity. Nearly 2 weeks later, on November 25th, the family of Peter Morgan, a 27-year-old delivery driver, also filed a missing person report. The scenario was identical to Leo's case. Peter had also vanished in the afternoon after making a delivery, his phone also ringing unanswered before going dead. At this point, the command staff at the sheriff's office began to feel that something was deeply wrong. 2 drivers from the same profession, disappearing within a short period under nearly identical circumstances, was a chilling coincidence. A special task force was formed to focus on these 2 cases. Yet, before the investigation could find any significant leads, the phantom struck again. On December 10th, Marcus Jones, a young man of only 22 who had just started working as a driver, became the 3rd victim. His mother, in a state of utter desperation, arrived at the sheriff's office, sobbing uncontrollably. She said her son was a good kid who gave her all his earnings to support the family. There was no reason for him to run away. The situation had become truly serious. 3 disappearances in less than a month. The news spread quickly, causing extreme panic among local drivers. Many refused to accept orders to remote, isolated areas in the late afternoon or evening. The delivery companies were also on edge, constantly coordinating with and pressuring the police. Faced with this complex situation, the Sheriff of St. Bernard Parish directed the Criminal Investigations Division CID to officially take over, establishing a major case task force. Detective Bohe Burr, a seasoned investigator famous for his ability to crack baffling cases, was appointed to lead it. Detective Heber and his team began their work under immense pressure. He ordered a complete review of all 3 missing person files, analyzing every detail. He realized that all the victims shared common traits. They were all young, healthy men who disappeared in the afternoon. This made it unlikely they were victims of ordinary robberies. Robbers would typically take the motorcycle and valuables and then release the person, rarely disposing of the victim so cleanly. This felt more like a targeted hunt. But the perpetrator continued to challenge law enforcement. On December 28th, just days before the new year, the 4th driver, Kevin Anderson, 40, the oldest and most experienced of the victims, also vanished without a trace. The tragedy reached its peak on January 15, 2024, when the 5th victim, a 19-year-old college student working part-time named Nathan Price, went out on his final delivery. 5 drivers. 5 lives. 5 families plunged into grief and turmoil. The entire parish was gripped by an invisible fear. Public outcry grew louder, demanding that the police find the truth quickly. The task force worked day and night. Hundreds of local criminals and individuals with prior records were brought in for questioning, but no suspicious signs were found. The case seemed to be at a dead end. The victims appeared to have evaporated. At this moment of complete stalemate, Detective Bohe Burr decided to change the investigative direction entirely. He reasoned that they had been too focused on searching for the victims after they disappeared. Now, they needed to go back in time to find out what the victims were doing before they vanished. Where did they go? Specifically, what was their last delivery? It was a logical direction, but implementing it was not simple. The order data from the tech companies could be deleted or overwritten. The task force had to work with the technical departments of 5 different delivery companies, requesting them to make every effort to recover the complete order history of the 5 victims on the days they went missing. After days of tense waiting, the data finally arrived. A team of elite investigators was assigned to analyze thousands of orders. They meticulously cross-referenced the time and location of each delivery, trying to pinpoint the final one for each man. The hard work finally paid off. They identified the 5 final deliveries of the 5 victims. When they placed the information for those 5 orders side by side on a single map, a horrifying truth emerged that made everyone in the task force briefing room hold their breath. All 5 drivers, working for 5 different companies, receiving orders at different times, and following different routes, had one thing in common. Their final, fateful delivery led them all to the exact same address. An address deep down a small dirt road in a rural part of the parish. It was not a house, it was a large, sprawling catfish farm, isolated from the surrounding residential areas. All the suspicion, all the mystery of the string of disappearances, now converged on this catfish farm. Some kind of deadly trap was hiding beneath the surface of that tranquil water. In the task force briefing room, the silence was so profound you could hear the clock ticking. The 5 red dots on the digital map, representing the 5 final deliveries, clustered in one spot, looking like a bloodstain spreading across the map of St. Bernard Parish. The silence was broken by Detective Boheber slamming his hand on the table. He said in a low, resolute voice that this was it. The nexus of the entire case was right there. They had found the wolf's den. Information about the mysterious catfish farm was gathered immediately. The farm was named Moonlight Catfish Farm, covering over 12 acres. It was isolated at the end of a narrow dirt road, nearly a mile from the closest neighbor, and surrounded by dense thickets and small bayous, creating an incredibly secluded location. The owner of the farm was a woman named Eliza Landry, 50, a widow whose husband had died in an accident over a decade ago. She lived alone in a large house in the middle of the property, with no children or close relatives living with her. According to local residents, Eliza was an enigmatic figure. She rarely socialized but was known to be generous, occasionally giving away fish or fruit. The one thing everyone agreed on was that even at 50, Eliza Landry possessed a striking, sharp-edged beauty. She had a slender figure, fair skin, and a sweet, graceful way of speaking that could charm any man. A beautiful widow living alone on a vast, remote catfish farm. The final destination of 5 missing men. These details painted an incredibly bizarre and frightening picture. Detective Heber concluded that Eliza Landry was very likely the perpetrator, or at least deeply involved. However, everything was still speculation. She had a good reputation and no criminal record. Approaching such a subject required absolute caution. A plan for surveillance and approach was drawn up. The task force decided not to appear as police but to follow the same path the victims had taken. They coordinated with a delivery company to create a fake order with the delivery address set to Moonlight Catfish Farm. The officer chosen for this mission was Mike Chen, a young, handsome, and quick-witted detective. He was equipped with a driver's uniform, a motorcycle, and a smartwatch with audio and video recording capabilities that transmitted a live feed back to the command center. On the afternoon of January 20th, Officer Chen, in his role as a delivery driver, rode his motorcycle down the dirt road leading to the farm. The deeper he went, the more deserted the scenery became. He felt an eerie silence, broken only by the wind and the squawking of a distant bird. Eliza Landry's house appeared at the end of the road, a solid, well-built home. It looked clean and tidy, showing no signs of being a place where crimes were hidden. Officer Chen parked his bike, took the fake package, and rang the gate bell. A few seconds later, the iron gate opened. A woman stepped out. It was Eliza Landry. She was wearing a sea-green silk housecoat that accentuated her fair skin and still captivating figure. Her dark hair was tied up neatly. She looked at the young driver and offered an incredibly friendly smile. Her voice sweet and pleasant, she apologized for him having to come down such a rough road. Officer Chen replied that it was no problem at all, just his job. He handed the package and the receipt to Eliza. As she signed, she started making small talk. She asked his name, remarking that he looked strong and handsome for such a hard and dangerous job. He told her his name was Mike and that every job had its difficulties. After signing, Eliza did not let him leave right away. She invited him into the house for a glass of water, suggesting he rest a bit and have a nice, cold glass of sweet tea before he went. Following the plan, Officer Chen did not refuse. He followed Eliza into the house. The living room was simply but cleanly furnished. Eliza told him to sit while she went to the kitchen. During that time, Chen discreetly scanned his surroundings but saw nothing suspicious. A moment later, Eliza returned with a tall glass of iced sweet tea with a fresh slice of lemon. It looked very appealing. She placed the glass on the coffee table in front of him, telling him to drink up. She sat opposite him and began a conversation that grew increasingly strange. She asked detailed questions about his job, his earnings, and whether he had a girlfriend. Then, she suddenly made an offer, a test of greed that the previous victims had likely failed. She asked how he would like to quit that difficult delivery job and come work for her. She explained that the farm was huge and she could not manage it all by herself. He could help her as a property manager, handling the books and supervising things, as she already had laborious for the heavy work. She offered to pay him 3 times what he made as a driver, with a share of the profits at the end of the year. The offer was so sudden and generous that any young man would be tempted. Officer Chen acted slightly surprised and overjoyed, asking if she would really trust him like that. Eliza smiled, satisfied, and replied that she would, of course, trust a hard-working, honest man like him. She declared the matter settled and pushed the glass of tea toward him again, her eyes full of expectation, suggesting they drink to their new partnership. This was the decisive moment. Officer Chen smiled but skillfully avoided the glass. He thanked her for the unexpected and thrilling offer but said he would have to pass on the tea. He explained that his company had a strict rule against drivers eating or drinking anything from customers, and if he were caught, he would be fired. He asked if he could have some time to think over her offer and return the next day with his answer. He had given a professional and reasonable excuse. Seeing him refuse the drink, a flicker of disappointment and suspicion crossed Eliza's face, but she hid it quickly. The reason was too valid for her to insist. She agreed, telling him to go home and think it over and that she would be waiting for him. She then became more flirtatious, asking him to stay and talk a little longer, remarking on how lonely she was. She suggested that maybe he did not just want to come work there, but to come live there with her. She stood up, moved closer, and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Officer Chen knew he had gathered enough intelligence. He gently removed her hand and stood up. He politely refused, saying he had to go or he would be late, but promised to be back tomorrow to talk more. With that, he turned and walked quickly out the door. Once he was on his bike and driving away, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw Eliza still standing at the gate, watching him with a look of regret and something unreadable. Back at the command center, Detective Heber and his team had heard and seen the entire exchange. Heber was certain she used the same script, probing them, testing their greed, and then offering them a drink. He was sure the sweet tea had something in it and that the 5 victims must have agreed to her offer and drank that fateful glass. The first approach was a success. The task force now understood the killer's method of luring and screening her victims. But the biggest questions remained. What happened after the victims drank the drugged liquid? And where had their motorcycles and their bodies disappeared to? Returning from Moonlight Catfish Farm, Officer Mike Chen gave a full debriefing to the task force. Every detail was thoroughly analyzed. Detective Bo Heber concluded that her method of approach perfectly matched their theory. It was a highly sophisticated seduction script targeting the psychology of young men in difficult circumstances. That glass of tea was the key, likely laced with a high dose of a sedative. The victims drank it, and then the tragedy unfolded. The task force now understood the method of the crime, but this was just the beginning. Officer Chen's testimony was valuable but not solid legal evidence. To bring charges against a cunning individual like Eliza Landry, they needed physical evidence. But how could they find it without sufficient grounds for a search warrant? After hours of deliberation, Detective Heber proposed another daring plan. They would return to the farm under a completely open and legal pretext. The task force coordinated with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife Fisheries, forming a joint inter-agency team under the guise of conducting a surprise inspection of catfish farms in the area for disease control and environmental hygiene. It was a legitimate reason that would allow them legal access to her entire property. On the morning of January 25th, The inspection team of 5 actual officials and 3 plainclothes detectives posing as specialists arrived at the farm. Seeing the official vehicles, Eliza seemed slightly surprised but quickly regained her calm, welcoming demeanor, cooperating fully. She welcomed the state inspectors, offering them coffee and assuring them that her farm always followed all regulations. While the 2 fisheries officials performed their duties, Detective Heber and the 2 other detectives began their silent search. Eliza proved to be incredibly shrewd, constantly staying by Heber's side, chattering on about her clean farming process, seemingly to supervise him. However, Detective Heber skillfully detached himself by asking deep, technical questions that required her to guide his 2 junior specialists. Taking advantage of the moment Eliza was distracted, he walked alone behind the main house to a few small storage sheds and an overgrown garden. He meticulously scanned the ground but found nothing unusual. Just as he was about to turn back, his eyes landed on a dense clump of old banana trees in the farthest corner of the garden. Beneath the trees was a patch of scorched black earth mixed with a large amount of ash. Clearly, someone had recently burned something here. Detective Heber approached, put on gloves, and knelt to examine the site. At first, there was only ash from dry leaves and twigs, but as he carefully brushed away the top layer, a foreign object was revealed, a metal jean button, blackened by smoke but still recognizable. A bad feeling washed over him, and he continued to dig. Then, other items appeared, a melted brass zipper, the half-burnt rubber sole of a sneaker, and numerous charred fabric fragments that were recognizable as the remnants of men's clothing from many different people. This discovery was a lightning strike. The act of a woman living alone secretly burning multiple sets of men's clothing was extremely suspicious. Burning is usually done only to destroy evidence. Detective Heber called Eliza over. He pointed to the ash pile and asked calmly who had burned these things. Eliza glanced over, her expression unchanging. She laughed and replied naturally that it was her, just getting rid of some old, torn work clothes from temporary farmhands. A perfect answer, but it did not fool Detective Heber. He knew she was lying. The inspection team left after completing their mission. They now had their first piece of physical evidence. Although not enough for a conviction, it strongly reinforced their suspicions. On the drive back, Detective Heber sat staring pensively out at the endless catfish farms. He looked at the flat, murky green water of the Moonlight Farm, and a horrifying theory flashed through his mind. A vast, deep pond, and at the bottom, tens of thousands of carnivorous catfish. If one wanted to dispose of a body, what place could be more ideal and terrifying? Murder, burn the clothes to destroy evidence, then sink the body for the fish to consume. A perfect, traceless crime. The motorcycles could also be at the bottom of that pond. Back at the command center, Detective Heber convened an emergency meeting and presented his theory. The room fell silent. Everyone felt a chill run down their spine at the thought of Eliza Landry's cruelty. They now had a near-complete picture of the crime, but a theory was still just a theory. To get a warrant to drain an entire 12-acre catfish farm, they needed more solid proof. They needed to catch her in the act. Heber said, his voice hard, that there was no other way. They had to go back one more time. Officer Chen would play the part of the prey again, but this time, he would not refuse the drink. This time, the trap must be sprung. The decision to return to Moonlight Catfish Farm was incredibly risky. The danger to the undercover officer would be exponentially higher this time. Last time, Officer Chen could cleverly refuse. This time, he would have to pretend to drink the drugged liquid, placing himself in a state of complete helplessness. Detective Bo Heber met personally with Officer Mike Chen to assign the mission, not hiding the risks. He called it an extremely dangerous assignment that could cost him his life. He told Chen that if he did not feel ready, they would find another way, as officer safety came first. Officer Chen stood straight, his eyes showing no hesitation. He stated he was ready to accept the mission, that the sacrifice of 5 innocent citizens was greater than any risk to him. He trusted the plan and his team. The young officer's courage bolstered the team's confidence. The plan was laid out with even more meticulous care. Every contingency was considered. To counter the deadly drink, a sophisticated solution was prepared. Officer Chen would be fitted with a system of micro-liquid pouches hidden under his uniform. An ultra-thin, nearly invisible tube would run from the pouch up along his collar. When drinking, He would have to use a difficult technique to direct the liquid into the tube's opening instead of swallowing it. It was an extremely difficult maneuver requiring absolute focus, but it was the only way to ensure his safety. The special operations team hidden around the farm was doubled in size, equipped and ready to storm the property in under 30 seconds upon command. The action signal would be given by Detective Heber the moment the hidden camera captured a clear criminal act. On the afternoon of January 29, 2024, just a day before the city would shut down for Mardi Gras, Officer Chen once again rode his motorcycle down the familiar dirt road. He returned to the farm as promised, acting excited and happy. Seeing her prey return, Eliza was overjoyed. Her voice as sweet as honey, she exclaimed that she knew he would be back and urged him to come in. The script played out once more. Eliza went to the kitchen and returned with a glass of orange juice, which undoubtedly contained a sedative. She again made her sweet offers of a wealthy, comfortable future. This time, Officer Chen showed no hesitation. He acted completely convinced, telling her he had thought about it all night and had decided to quit his job and work for her. Eliza beamed, a smile of pure satisfaction. She declared that was the spirit and that if they worked together, there would be no shortage of money. She pushed the glass toward him, her eyes gleaming with anticipation, and suggested a toast to his wise decision. Officer Chen nodded and picked up the glass. In the command center, everyone's hearts seemed to stop. They watched his every move on the monitor. He brought the glass to his lips and tilted his head back, taking a long, seemingly natural drink. He had executed the technique flawlessly, diverting the entire contents of the glass into the hidden pouch. He set the empty glass down, wiping his mouth with a look of refreshment. About 5 minutes later, he began his act. He clutched his head and groaned softly, asking why he felt so dizzy all of a sudden. Eliza replied, her voice now holding a hint of coldness, that it was nothing and that he should just lie down on the sofa to rest. Officer Chen staggered and then collapsed onto the sofa, closing his eyes and pretending to be completely unconscious. Seeing her prey completely ensnared, Eliza Landry dropped her mask. The sweet, charming smile vanished, replaced by a cold, ruthless expression. She stood up, walked over, and shook him roughly. Seeing no reaction, she let out a disdainful, quiet laugh. Her next actions laid bare her entire criminal enterprise. With practiced efficiency, she searched Officer Chen's body, taking his wallet, cash, cell phone, and the delivery package. The act of robbery was clearly recorded. But she did not stop there. She went into another room and returned with a coil of thick, sturdy rope. She approached him and began to tightly bind his hands and feet, tying the knots with a chilling professionalism. In the command center, Detective Heber clenched his fists. They had enough evidence for robbery and kidnapping. But he waited, wanting to see what she would do next. After tying up her victim, Eliza began to drag him off the sofa, pulling him toward the back door, which led directly to the edge of the fish pond. Her intent to dispose of him was clear. This was the moment the task force had been waiting for. Heber grabbed his radio, his voice sharp and unhesitating. All units, execute. The order was given, and the deathly silence of the farm was shattered by the sound of the iron gate being rammed open, the thunder of dozens of deputies' boots, and the authoritative shout, "Sheriff's office." "Don't move." Hearing the chaos, Eliza jumped, her face a mask of pure panic. Seeing armed officers storming her house from both the front and back, she knew it was over. She let go of Officer Chen and looked wildly for an escape route, but every exit was blocked. When the detective stormed the living room, she just stood there, stunned, her eyes filled with disbelief and rage. Officer Chen, whom she thought was unconscious, now sat up and began to untie himself. He looked at her not with the naive eyes of a young driver, but with the sharp gaze of a police officer. Detective Heber said, his voice as cold as ice, "Eliza Landry, you're under arrest." Taken to the St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office for questioning, Eliza Landry initially maintained a defiant, uncooperative attitude. In the interrogation room, facing Detective Bo Heber, she remained silent. Even when confronted with the recorded evidence of her robbing and tying up Officer Chen, she stubbornly denied it, fabricating a story that he had attacked her first and she had acted in self-defense. Detective Heber was unfazed. He knew that with a cunning individual like Eliza, a forced confession would never work. He signaled for his team to begin presenting evidence. First was the video from Officer Chen's button camera. Her entire performance played out on the screen. Eliza's face began to change color, but she still clenched her teeth in silence. Next, Heber showed her the crime scene photos from her garden, the charred remnants of men's clothing, the jean button, the melted zipper. He asked in a low, sharp voice why a woman living alone would have a hobby of burning men's clothing, especially since all her previous employees confirmed they took all their belongings with them when they left. Eliza began to tremble, her wall of defense starting to crack. Then, the final, decisive blow was delivered. Detective Heber laid 5 portrait photos on the table, the photos of the 5 missing drivers. Leo Sullivan, Peter Morgan, Marcus Jones, Kevin Anderson, Nathan Price. He read each name aloud. He asked if she knew the one thing they all had in common. Their last delivery before disappearing forever was to her, Eliza Landry. Looking at the 5 young faces, Eliza Landry suddenly broke down, sobbing hysterically. These were tears of rage, guilt, and complete collapse. She knew any further denial was useless. The task force knew everything. Yes, she admitted through her sobs. It was me. I did it all. And then, the once beautiful woman confessed to her entire horrifying crime spree. It was a tragic story of love, betrayal, hatred, and twisted, pathological revenge. Many years ago, after her husband's death, she had fallen in love with a young delivery driver. She had trusted him, given him all her love and nearly her entire life savings. But he vanished with the money, leaving her with a shattered heart and a bottomless hatred for all men who work that job. She believed they were all lying, greedy frauds. She confessed that she had created a test. Any driver who came here, she made them an offer of wealth and an easy job. If they refused, she let them go. But if they showed greed and accepted, then in her eyes, they were exactly the same as the man who cheated her, and they deserved to die. The 5 victims had all failed her cruel test. They had agreed, and they had drunk the fateful glass. She recounted with chilling, detached calm that after they passed out, she would strangle them with a rope until they were dead. Then she would take their money and whatever packages they were carrying as the price for their greed. When asked about the motorcycles, she replied that she would wait until the middle of the night, wheel them to the dock, siphon the gasoline, and then push the bike into the deepest part of the pond. The disposal was calculated and ruthless. Siphoning the gas prevented an oil slick and showed a chilling practicality. After disposing of the motorcycles, she would use a wheelbarrow to transport the bodies to the dock, tie them to concrete blocks she had prepared, and push them into the pond. The victims' clothing and belongings were burned in the garden, leaving no trace. The full confession was recorded. A complete picture of the crime had emerged. At the bottom of Moonlight Catfish Farm lay not just water and mud, but a cold graveyard hiding the bodies of 5 men, 5 motorcycles, and the horrifying secret of a she-devil. Detective Heber looked at the signed confession. He had what he needed. He stood up and left the interrogation room. His next order, though anticipated, still sent a wave of samber gravity through those who heard it. Notify the entire task force to prepare for a full-scale scene preservation. Contact the dive team, search and rescue, and the city's environmental services. We are draining Moonlight Catfish Farm. The confession of Eliza Landry painted a complete picture of the crime. Immediately after securing it, Detective Bo Heber issued the final, most painful order, to drain the entire catfish farm. Preparations were launched with unprecedented speed. By dawn on January 30th, the area was under a strict lockdown. The St. Bernard Parish Fire Department and search rescue teams mobilized dozens of high-capacity water pumps. Sheriff's deputies and volunteers established a multi-layered security perimeter. A mobile command post and medical tent were set up, ready for any eventuality, especially for the victims' families. As the massive pumps roared to life, a heart-stopping tension enveloped the scene. Torrents of murky, blackish water began to be pumped into a nearby canal. The families of the 5 victims, though psychologically prepared, could not contain their grief. They stood in a designated area, watching the water level slowly recede, waiting in supreme anguish. Their last glimmer of hope was gone. Now, their only wish was to recover the remains of their loved ones for a proper burial. The process was agonizingly slow. The farm was over 12 acres and dozens of feet deep. The first day passed, and the water level only dropped by about 10 feet. On the second day, as the pumping continued, the air became unbearable with the smell of mud and decay. By midday on the second day, a strange object began to surface, the rear-view mirror of a motorcycle. A dive team was deployed and confirmed it was a complete motorcycle. A crane was brought in, and the first motorcycle was slowly pulled from the water. A quick check of the license plate confirmed it belonged to the first victim, Leo Sullivan. In the hours that followed, the other 4 motorcycles were found and recovered. The 5 bikes, the physical evidence from 5 murders, were lined up on the bank, the last silent witnesses to a savage crime. By the morning of the third day, the entire pond had been drained, leaving a vast, black pit of viscous mud. The final and most agonizing phase of the search was about to begin. A special team of 20 search and rescue personnel and forensic examiners, clad in full hazmat suits and rubber waders, entered the pond bed. Their work was incredibly strenuous. They had to trudge through knee-deep mud, using long iron probes to carefully search the sludge. Nearly 2 hours of searching passed with no results. Then, a loud shout shattered the silence. "Got something hard over here." All attention shifted to a spot in the middle of the pond. The team quickly gathered, carefully using shovels and their hands to clear away the mud. A rectangular concrete block slowly emerged, wrapped in a thick, rusted iron chain. As they followed the chain, a horrific sight was revealed. Attached to the other end was a human tibia, its white bone a stark contrast against the black mud. On the bank, cries of anguish could no longer be suppressed. Forensic examiners approached and meticulously cleared away the mud. Ribs, a spinal column, and finally, a human skull emerged. The first set of skeletal remains had been found. The discovery of the first set focused the search. Over the next few hours, the second, third, fourth, and fifth sets of remains were also found in different locations, all tied to heavy objects like concrete blocks or sacks of rocks. As the sun began to set, the search concluded. On the bank, 5 sets of skeletal remains were laid out on white tarps next to the 5 rusted motorcycles. The final, most complete evidence of Eliza Landry's crimes had been laid bare. Now, the task force's responsibility was to ensure that justice, though delayed, would be served. The autopsies were conducted with urgency by the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. Using dental records and DNA comparison, the identities of all 5 victims were officially confirmed: Leo Sullivan, Peter Morgan, Marcus Jones, Kevin Anderson, and Nathan Price. The forensic results also showed that the cause of death for all victims was consistent with strangulation, corroborating Eliza Landry's confession. With a full suite of evidence, the St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office completed its investigation. The full case file, thousands of pages long, was transferred to the District Attorney's Office. The DA's office issued an indictment, charging Eliza Landry before the St. Bernard Parish District Court with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of armed robbery, with multiple aggravating circumstances. In June 2024, the trial began. The Catfish Farm widow case had shocked the entire nation, and security was at its highest level. Hundreds of citizens and a large press corps gathered at the courthouse. Inside, there was not an empty seat. On the front benches, the tears and sobs of wives who had lost husbands and mothers who had lost sons created an atmosphere of tragic mourning. Standing before the court, Eliza Landry no longer possessed her captivating allure. She was just a haggard woman, her hair streaked with grey, her face gaunt and soulless. Throughout the trial, she was mostly silent, showing not a shred of remorse. The prosecutor, in his closing argument, fully reconstructed the defendant's chain of crimes. From the pain of being cheated, a seed of hatred had transformed Eliza Landry into a monster. She had turned her farm into a tribunal, herself into a cruel judge. The prosecutor concluded forcefully that the defendant's actions were exceptionally cruel, savage, and devoid of humanity. Her pain of betrayal could never be an excuse to justify taking 5 innocent lives. He argued that the defendant was beyond rehabilitation and must be permanently removed from society. In her final statement, Eliza Landry did not ask for forgiveness. She only lifted her soulless face, looked toward the victims' families, and let out a cold smile. She said she did not regret it, that they deserved to die, that all greedy men deserve to die. Her final, chilling words extinguished any faint hope of remorse and only served to make her crimes even more abhorrent. After a long deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. The courtroom fell completely silent as the judge began to read the sentence. He declared that the actions of the defendant, Eliza Landry, were calculated and meticulously prepared. Her crimes were unforgivable and demonstrated an ultimate contempt for the law and human life. He stated that given the nature and extent of her criminal acts, the court found it necessary to apply the highest penalty. The judge announced the sentence. On the 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of armed robbery, this court sentences the defendant, Eliza Landry, to the maximum penalty, death. The sentence was read out, clear and firm. In the gallery, the victims' families burst into tears, not just of pain, but of relief that justice had finally been served. Eliza Landry heard the sentence with no expression. She silently allowed the bailiffs to lead her away. The case closed, but the tragic stories surrounding it will be told for a long time. Moonlight Catfish Farm, once a factory of evil, was seized and filled in. But for the local people, it will forever be a dead land, a place synonymous with the horrifying crimes of the Catfish Farm widow. The case is a costly lesson on the dangers of hatred when nurtured by loneliness and bitterness, transforming a person into a monster. And it is a painful reminder that behind a seemingly peaceful exterior can sometimes hide an abyss of sin too deep to fathom.